Hi everyone, welcome to Recitation 4 for the class AIML901. Today we are going to be talking about the whole process from beginning to end of creating a product in NEN and connecting to some other services as well. So really the goal for today is to create beautiful front ends for your NEN products, but also kind of really think about how NEN receives information, sends information, just to make this a little bit more generalizable. Before this point, we have created a lot of workflows in NEN, but those might not be so customer facing. They're a little bit more internal to NEN, and a lot of the time we want to present information in a way that is very easy to understand for people. And an easy way to do that is just simply UX, making sure that it is a simple product and thinking about this like input side and the output and their formats, I think will be really helpful for your projects and just in thinking about like what exactly do you want this to look like? What is most helpful for your target audience? So previously we had mentioned these things called HTTP requests, and just kind of as a brief refresher, the idea is that you can use a specific node in NEN to call another service. And so this could be Gmail, it could be Slack, Telegram, there's so many different services. But the way it works is that we send a request to a certain endpoint, so a URL, and then it returns information. So that's why I'm saying an HTTP request calls another service. And a lot of the nodes just native to NEN are essentially an HTTP request. We just don't see it because it hides what the URL is, because it's a very specific one. There might be some form of authentication, and so it goes there, it gets information, and brings it back for us. So a lot of the nodes are really just like wrappers around this to get information, such as like the OpenAI API. However, we also want to kind of have the reverse. We want other services to be able to call our NEN workflow. And that's kind of what we're going to focus on today. So for example, what we're going to see is with Lovable. So imagine that we have a website where someone can submit a form. We want, when they submit that form, that information to go to NEN. You see how that's like a little bit different. And you think about where the endpoint is, that service, in this case Lovable, is sending information to a specific URL that NEN has that can then pull that information, trigger our workflow, and then it sends it back. So it's kind of about like who's sending and who is receiving information when we think about this. So this is going to be a little bit of an easier recitation. There's going to be a little bit less content. We know that this is a very busy week for you. We're getting close to the middle of the quarter. So we really want to make sure that you feel comfortable with this, but also keep in mind that this is not necessary for your project. It's just kind of like a nice added bonus, and it's a good feature to understand as you go forward and continue to make other products. So with that in mind, let's head over to our recitation website and NEN and dive in. I'm now over on our website, and I just want to show you something very quick. I have this whole section called HTTP requests and webhooks that gives you a little bit more information in depth on what exactly information we are receiving, like kind of like the methods that we need to use. We'll see this in NEN in just a second, but just in case you need to see it written down, and very importantly, and I'll reiterate this throughout this recitation, but I was talking about like how each of these has like a specific endpoint, like a URL. So for our webhook, NEN has a specific URL, and information can be sent there that will start our workflow. Well, if you think about it, if someone has that URL and we don't have like any form of like authentication set up, then they could send information and start our workflow and receive information back, which can be a little dangerous, so be careful about publishing your URLs online. You don't really want to do that. That being said, there are forms of authentication. I'll show you kind of what that looks like. I encourage you to experiment with that, but that's just a note of warning. So any of the URLs that I have in this recitation, I'm going to like pretty much immediately disable after so that no one can actually use those to trigger my workflows. So let's go over to NEN, and what we are going to do is essentially make a ChatGPT clone. just to kind of see like what exactly is happening. We know that like the website ChatGPT or like Claude, it's a nice interface where we can send messages and have conversations with an LLM. But we know that the LLM is not actually the website itself. It's like some software somewhere else. And we know that it's just like kind of a file. It's not even that big. It's a set of weights connected in some way that transform input into text output. So what we are going to do is start to build that and get a sense of what exactly is happening. How can we make something similar on our own? So I'm going to hit create workflow, and this is going to be a very simple workflow, and then I'll show you like a more complicated example, just kind of demonstrate what exactly we can do here. So I'm just going to rename this for my sake. I'm going to say Lovable ChatGPT clone. You can call it whatever you want, but that's just going to help me remember what my workflow is. And now, just as a reminder, we have seen a lot of these triggers. And just as a quick note, I know that we had talked about what order these last recitations will be in, and Professor Martin and I actually decided to switch the order just to better align with the class and when we are going to do things related to what's called evaluation. So we will see when running evaluation actually next week, but we're going to use this thing called onWebhookCall. And so just click on that and see what this looks like. So you can also, from the Recitation website, copy over the code for these nodes. It's only a couple nodes, so I encourage you just to follow along with me, especially because if you copy it over, it'll actually have the same URL, which is a little dangerous, so I would encourage you to remake this node anyways, just because that URL is posted online. So just being super safe, I want to be very transparent about that. Okay. So we've got this webhook URL. So we've got a test URL, which you can use for testing. If you want to like deploy this at like a larger scale, we would actually want to click here and go to the production URL, and you can see it just changes a little bit. So this is the endpoint that Lovable or whatever other service you want is going to call to send information to our workflow. And we have this thing called an HTTP method. These are different methods that let you send information in different ways. And if you actually want to take a look and learn about this more, so if we went to docs here, this will take us to the documentation for the webhook node. But if we scroll down, you'll see this thing that's HTTP method, and says the webhook node supports standard HTTP request methods. So here are some of the examples. And if I click here, then you can learn a little bit more about what each one does, like how they work. And then also like if it's safe, it's idempotent, if it's cacheable. I know this is a lot. I'm just kind of throwing a lot of words at you. This is not super necessary for the class, but just so you know and you are aware that this is all here. We are mostly going to focus on using post, and a lot of the times that's really what you want, because it says submits an entity to the specified resource. So that's saying that from Lovable, we're going to send information to N8N, often causing a change in state or side effects on the server. And so we are going to have some sort of change, because if you think about it, what we're going to do is we're going to take a message, from like a user message, then we're going to give it to our webhook. We're going to give that to an AI agent somehow. It's going to generate a response, so that's kind of the change on the server, and then we send it back. So I know that's kind of a lot of information. Just wanted to let you know what resources are available if you want to learn more. So I'll just close this quickly. And going back here, so as I said, HTTP method, we probably want post. The path here, it actually just lines up with the path here. So if I change this, you can actually see that it starts to change in this URL. If we want to, we can have some authentication. So we could make sure that like this other service that's calling it has to go through some form of authentication. You could think like an API key or something like that, just so when entities are sending information to this webhook, it's not like anyone can do it. They have to have more information. We're going to leave it off for now, but it's probably safer to have it on. And then in terms of responding, we could have it respond immediately. But what we want to do is we want to take the information from that webhook, transform it somehow, and then respond. So if we click on this dropdown, we're actually going to use respond to webhook node, because that'll give us the maximum control over what exactly we return. So let's do that. And it says that we have to insert a respond to webhook node to actually do this. So that'll be kind of like our last step before we head over to Lovable. And in terms of options, there's a lot of things. So binary data is about files. So if you want to be able to send a file to NAN, you might want to specify what the field name is, just so you know like where to refer to it. There's some other information here that I encourage you to explore. But that's really how we are going to get the information from a Lovable. And at this point, we're like, well, Alex, what's that information look like? It's actually going to be JSON, but we haven't said what exactly these like keys and values are going to look like that we are receiving. And we're going to actually have to specify that in Lovable and say, hey, when you send information to the webhook in NAN, we want it to be in this format. And I mentioned this in the Recitation 4 document, so if you scroll down, I actually say it in step 2 for the AI agent. And so we're going to say that from Lovable, we're going to get a key called text and another called session ID. And so those are going to represent like the text is going to be the message from the user. So if they're like sending something to ChatGPT, it's going to be that. And then the session ID will just let us keep track of like the conversation we're in, which is important so we can keep track of like which messages go with which. With that in mind, let's actually head over to Lovable and get our website started. It's going to take a little bit for it to create the first version, and it'll let us be able to test this webhook, make sure that our JSON is formatted properly, and that we get exactly what we want so that we'll be able to continue with this workflow and really make sure that it's working the way that we want. So in Lovable, what I'm going to say, what we really need to specify is how information is going to be passed and what services we're using. So I'm going to say, let's make, so this doesn't have to be exact. This I'm just kind of going with what I think makes sense to really get this to work. Let's make a ChatGPT clone, but make it Northwestern Kellogg purple. And then what I need to say is we will use N8N as a backend, send, and then we have to tell it how it's going to send information. We're going to say information using the post method. So remember that we used that for our webhook. And if it doesn't match the method, it's going to cause issues. It's not going to figure it out because N8N is going to be listening for one thing, Lovable is going to be sending it in a different format, so those won't actually match up. I say send information using the post method to, and then I need to actually go get the URL. So I'll go to the webhook and I'm going to copy this URL. Note that I'm just using the test one for now. I'm going to tell it, so send information using the post method to here. And then I'm going to tell it exactly what I want. I'm going to use JSON with keys text, which is the user message, and session ID, which you will generate and will tell us which conversation we're in. Every time a new user visits the site, you should generate a new session ID. So we're almost there, but then we also need to tell it what information it's going to receive back. You will receive back JSON with keys output. So that's going to be the message to display and session ID to keep track of the conversation. So remember, in N8N, we've got this idea of simple memory. And so that's why we kind of need to pass the session ID back and forth to make sure that we know like what conversation we're in, so that it has a sense of like what is actually happening. If we just didn't include the session ID, each individual message would be like essentially a new conversation, which is not exactly what we want. So let's just review what we have. So we tell it a little bit about, I didn't tell it a lot about like what I want the website to look like. I said make it look purple, and it's kind of like a chatbot. But then I'm saying, okay, so here's the service we're using. We're using N8N. We're going to send information using this method to, I'm going to even just specify the webhook. I think it should know, but just to be very careful, I give it the URL to send the information to the method. To do that, I tell it what how I want this information formatted so we can use it in any N, just like I said in the web page. And then I tell it how to generate the session ID. So essentially, I'm just giving it all the information it needs to generate something well. And why is this important? Remember, we're vibe coding. So the benefit of using any N is that we have more control. We know exactly what's going on one end. Right now, I mean, it's a little tricky. I don't actually know how it's generating the session ID. And so that can be a little dangerous. Maybe someone else can figure it out and can access like someone's conversation history. So that is one of the risks and something that we need to take into account. There's a way to build in like authentication to Lovable, so then people could log in and then we could use that to generate conversations. I encourage you to explore that on your own. Not really going to do that right now, but this is just a really good way for us to figure out like exactly what's going on and make sure we have the information. So I'm actually going to send this. It's going to take some time for it to generate this website, and then when it does, I'll be right back and we'll go over to to NAN, and we will test our webhook just to see what the format looks like. Our website is now created. Looks like something like ChatGPT, some sort of chatbot. We've got a nice new chat button. I'm unsure what these buttons will do. We'll have to explore a little bit more. One little note, it actually tells us what the session ID is, which is not ideal. So something we might have to do a little bit of iteration to get this, but for our purposes for now, just for like a test, this will be great. So let's take a look and get started. So over in NAN, if I hit execute workflow, it says waiting for you to call the test URL. So what we are going to do now is we're going to send a message. We'll say hello. And it says, sorry, I encountered an error processing your request. Please try again. But that's okay. Right now we have some things set up weirdly in NAN. Remember, we've got a webhook, but we don't have like a respond to webhook. So there's weird things going on right now. But if we actually go over here, we see a problem in node webhook. So it clearly received something, but it says no respond to webhook node found in the workflow. That's exactly what I was saying. So if I click in, okay, so it doesn't even show us the input. So that's an important note, right? Like, okay, we need to have like this response in order for it to do stuff. So what I'm going to do is just do that right now. We'll create respond to webhook. And we're going to figure this out in a little bit, figure out exactly what we want, but we're just going to leave it like that for now. This is just a test just to show you like what our keys look like, and let's try again. So I'm going to execute workflow, and it's just say waiting to call the test URL. So this is also just a good example of why we need to just make sure we're doing testing and understand exactly what the errors are we're facing in NAN. So I'm going to say hello again. Okay, it says, I received your message but couldn't generate a response. So that's actually not coming directly from NAN. It seems like that's something that Lovable has decided it's going to do. But so let's take a look and see. And so we actually have like these nice green check marks. So this is good news. It looks like it's receiving stuff. So let's go to the webhook. And we can actually see as the output here, we can see a lot of information. So we see these headers. So it tells us who the host is. Lots of different information that is about like what exactly happened, but what we're focusing on is this idea of body. So this is where our keys are living that we said we want to return. So we said we want a text and we want a session ID. So it came up with some sort of session ID and it came up with text. And so we can actually see our message here. So this is great news. This will tell us exactly what to do with our AI agent. And so if we now add an AI agent, so we're going to do that right in the center here. We need to generate a response. And right now it's a source for prompt connected chat trigger node. We don't have a chat trigger, so we're going to hit define below. And what do we want our user message to be? Well, we probably want it to just be the message sent by the user. So in this case, it's going to be this. JSON.body.text. When I was first thinking about like building this, I actually made the AI agent node and like put this in before making the website and generating it. But I think it's more informative for us to see exactly that it creates a body and then text as our JSON here. And so if we want, we could add a system message. We could require a specific output format. Just as a note, by default, this AI agent node will come up with a JSON that has one key called output. And we'll see that in a second, but we need to add a chat model. So remember, I could exit and then add the chat model here. Just as a little side note, if you want to, you can actually click here to add a chat model. So I'll do that plus. I'll search for OpenAI. And then I can choose a model. I'm going to choose GPT 5.2. Of course, we could choose, and I'm actually going to turn the reasoning on low to make this very fast. So I put reasoning effort on low. And I haven't really mentioned this, but there's some built-in tools that we could use if we want. So there's something like web search, file search, code interpreter. So web search lets it, it kind of gives it a tool that we don't see in N8N. We could just build this in N8N, and so that's kind of, it's a little bit less clear what's going on, and that's why we want to use N8N, is just to really understand what is going on behind the scenes, understand what tools we have available to us. So this is very important here. Okay, so now if we take a look, well, we have a webhook, it gives it to the AI agent, we give it a message, it doesn't even have a system message, it's just going to act like, here, let me just execute this step so we can see, it'll just generate some sort of output. And we see output, hello, what can I help you with today? That sounds very much like something that ChatGPT would say if we just said hello. But as we mentioned, we currently don't have a way for our AI to have a memory. Remember, this is just like a separate API call every single time. And so we need to use the memory node. So we could have done it like we do before, where we hit X and then hit the plus for memory. We can also just do it right down here if I hit add memory. And so that's the same as clicking here. And I'll click simple memory. And we don't have a chat trigger node, so we can't use that. But this is actually exactly why we added this idea of a session ID on Lovable, so that it generates it whenever someone comes to the website, and then it remembers this conversation. We might need to do it a little bit differently if we want one person to have multiple conversations. We could think about exactly how we want to do that, but for the sake now, we're not going to, and we're looking here and we see this session ID. And so I'm actually going to pull this in here. And assuming that Lovable has done a good job, and that's an if, in generating these session IDs kind of in a unique way for each user so there's no overlap, then this is a great way for us to remember for a given user what conversations they have had. And we can actually test that out, but for the last step, we need to make sure that we respond in a way that makes sense. So remember, we've got this output, and now to respond to the webhook, what do we want? We said when we created the Lovable website that we want to give it back that message so that it can display it, but then also the session ID. So we're going to just like pass that session ID back and forth. Perhaps there are better ways to do this, but this is just so we remember what conversation we are in, and so that Lovable can then pass back the same session ID and not accidentally generate a new one. And so we've got these different respond methods. So this is respond with first incoming item. Previously, when we did it, it didn't have any like incoming item, and that's why we see this like I received a message but couldn't generate a response. So it looks like Lovable built in some like nice error handling where it says, okay, if we don't actually receive anything, we should just display like a nice message. But we want to very much control what we are going to do. So we could respond with all incoming items, a binary file, so that's just like a file. We're going to do with JSON. And so we are going to go back to Recitation 2 and think about exactly what we want. And we said that we want to have something called output. And so remember, we've got to have quotation marks around it to indicate that it's words. And then we're going to put as output this. But if we, okay, it looks like it put in the wrong place, so I'm just going to put it in right here. But look, you see this right now, when you see how it displays, it doesn't have quotation marks around it. So it's just going to try and read that as like words. So we actually do have to put quotation marks around this whole expression so that it can read it like as one phrase. And then we're also going to pass the session ID. So I'll type session ID. And if you want to just copy and paste this over, it is available on the website. And so then for the session ID, we're actually going to go back to the webhook node, and we're just going to pull it from there. And once again, I'm just going to put quotation marks around it. And so just to see what we see, we have like output, hello, what can I help you with today, and session ID, and here it is. And actually, that's really all we need for our webhooks, for like our back end with NAN. And so let's actually just test this out really quickly to make sure it works. We're going to do it twice just to see if it has some sort of memory. So let's do this. So I'll hit execute workflow. Now it's waiting. I'm going to say my name is Alex. It's going to take a second. It says, hi Alex, how can I help you today? And if we go back to NAN, we'll actually see that it received it. We can see that down here. The AI agent generated an output, which is what we saw displayed, so that's great. And then respond to webhook, it returned it. So, and now here's the real test. We're going to hit execute workflow again, and we're going to say, what is my name? And remember, it's a separate API call, but since we've got the simple memory with a session, if it has the session ID, which it does, it'll tell us our name. So that is great. So with all that in mind, very last thing, currently I'm having to execute workflow every single time that I want to make the call. If you want to do this more in practice, we could change the URL to production. Then remember, in Lovable, we also have to tell it, okay, we're updating the webhook URL. You have to call this one instead. And we'd hit publish, and then it would just constantly listen. So I wouldn't have to keep executing the workflow. But I'm not going to do that for now, just so I don't forget and expose this URL online so anyone else can call it and then use my OpenAI account. That would not be good. But we have generated essentially ChatGPT. There's some small differences. Does it have web search right now? No, there's certain things there. But we have done a lot. So what I want you to do now is try this yourself. Make sure that this is running. Then start to think about like tools. How would we get these tools working? What if we want to have like a system message? Are there certain things we need to change in Lovable to do that? And then maybe try and make another Lovable website and connect it to some N8N workflow. I'll show you a more complicated example in a second, but take some time, think about these, pause here. Then we'll talk about them before moving on to some other content. Now that you've had a second to try out these questions, let's just talk about them and think about what exactly we would need to change in order to get them to work. So remember, if we want to have our chatbot be able to read our email, we already know how to add tools in N8N. So let's actually head over there. So we could just add tools. So I could just add my Gmail tool. I could then have it send messages, but I could have it also get messages. There's a lot of different options here. I'm not going to actually do it. I encourage you to start to think about it. But this is actually kind of how different services connect to Claude, to ChatGPT. You log in, give it some sort of permission. In our case, what we did is we gave it an API key or a credential. I think we just for Gmail and just logged in, and then it was able to connect. And that's exactly what we're doing here. We would just need to tell our AI agent, maybe we give it a little bit of a system message that says you have these tools available. Just respond as a chatbot. There's different ways for us to do it. But there's not a lot that we need to do on the front end with Lovable to get that to work. On the other hand, what if we wanted the user to be able to set a system message? Well, that's a little bit different. So this one is more about our chatbot and the backend and what instructions we give it and the tools available. But if we want the user to be able to set a system message, then in our interface, we need to have a way to do that. So think about like custom GPTs. We had like a little sidebar, and then you were able to like have a little box where you put the message. And so what we would need to do is we would need to add that to our interface and then say, well, like tell Lovable to like generate that, and then say when we are passing information, we need to pass another key, which is going to be the system message. So that then when it's received here, instead of just having the text and session ID keys, we'd also have one that's like called system message or whatever we want it to be called. And then here when we could like add a system message and just pull that in here and have that be our system message, maybe along with any other instructions we want. Remember, we have to be a little bit careful with that, just because putting stuff in the system message, if someone puts something that we don't really like, there's some safety concerns. So that's also another consideration when we do something like that. But that being said, there are a lot of different ways to do that. You could maybe even put it in the user message if you want to be a little bit less strong and say, what we have in the user message is going to be the text that you are to respond to, as well as a system message. Follow the system message unless there are certain things. And then we could consider like what exactly we want it to be. It's like we don't want to have X content or X language in our system message. If it has that, don't follow it, disregard, something like that. There's a lot of different ways. And this really gets back to like our safety considerations and ethics considerations when we are using AI. So with that in mind, now hopefully you've had a little bit of a chance to explore and start to connect this up to your own workflows. It's a really great way to expand your project. Of course, it's totally not the core of it, but maybe it gives you some ideas on what you want your project to look like. What would customers see? And I think that's a really powerful visualization tool in thinking about like what exactly you want your project to do, what does it mean for it to do well, which is something we're going to talk about next week. So with that in mind, I'm going to hop over to a different N8N workflow and Lovable website to show you a slightly more complex example, just to give you a sense of like what is possible with this infrastructure. Now let's talk about a slightly more complex workflow that we could use for N8N and Lovable. This is going to be perhaps a little bit beyond the scope of a project. I just thought it was interesting and wanted to kind of showcase something that I built. So this is going to be an interview prep agent. And so the idea behind it is that you are going to submit some information about the job, the company, possibly also your resume, and then this will be on like a nice Lovable site. It'll take you to essentially a conversation that you have via text where it asks you questions. So it'll call an AI agent that kind of acts as like an interviewer based on that information from your resume and from like the job description specifically, which will send back, you'll respond, you'll have a conversation back and forth, and then at the end, there's going to be an analyze button. And when you click it, it provides a report that says, here's what you answered well based on this information. Here's what you could improve on. And it's very important to note that this is going to be like a small implementation of what you could do, and you can make this much more complex. We could implement stuff like Google search. We might want to know about the values of the company, what sorts of things they're looking for. And that should generally be in like the job description, but let's head over and see exactly what that is going to look like, both in N8N and on Lovable. So this is going to be a rather complex workflow, and so just so you know, there's going to be a lot going on, and just to show you exactly what's happening. So let's actually just go through it in Lovable very quickly to see what this looks like. So it gives you this nice form where you can fill out your name, your email address. Maybe the email address is not super important, but actually, in this case, it is just so you know which conversation goes with which user. So that's actually going to be important in terms of how I actually end up storing on the back end the conversation, which is not the cleanest way. I just have the conversation going back and forth in a Google Sheet, which I can then pull. We'll see that in a second. But maybe I want to be a teacher at some sort of company. I'm going to call it education company. But you know, if it was a real company, the way that I have this built, it could search about the company, which is really nice. And for the job description, maybe I'm going to say teach MBA students about operations management. And then I just hit start interview prep. It's a starting session. This takes a little bit to load. There's a lot going on here where it's taking all of this information from here, and then it's going to ask a question. So you can see it takes on the format of like an interviewer. It says, thanks for taking the time today. Can you walk me through your background relevant to this, including teaching roles, industry experience, specific OM topics you're most comfortable teaching? I'm only going to partially answer this. We're just going to go back and forth once or twice before I hit end interview and like analyze. So I'm going to say, I'm a PhD student in operations. I have taught a variety of subjects such as Algebra 1 and I'll just call it AgentOps. It's not exactly going to know what that is. It'll have the context of ChatGPT, so but that's not super well defined. This is not a very good response, right? I'm not really responding to the question, and so we want it to kind of catch us here. We'll see exactly what it comes up with. It takes a little bit to respond. Maybe something that would be nicer is if I come up with like a little box that like shows that it's thinking, because it is a little bit slow at this point. I could change the model or the reasoning effort to make it a little bit faster. It says, okay, it's really doubling down, which is kind of nice. I didn't really respond to which OM topics I'm most comfortable teaching. And so like what specific topics am I most confident teaching? And for one of those, how would I design, this is a 75 to 90 minute session, learning objectives, pre-class prep, in-class activities, and how you'd assess understanding. So lots of good questions here. Let's just like keep it like pretty simple and say something like, I like queuing and feel comfortable teaching about that. Like, so I'm really not answering the question. Let's do one more, and then I'm going to end interview just to give you a sense of what is going on. And I might cut here and see when it comes back with this final question. So it decided to move on to talk about a little bit more about like this. It's really trying to get me to talk in depth about something, which is good. That's what a good interviewer would do. They really want you to express yourself. But I'm actually going to end interview and it's going to analyze. The way I have it set up, it's going to take a little bit, but it's going to essentially compile this whole conversation and then be a critic and think about what did I do well, what could have gone better, and give me some constructive feedback. And I think this is very important when you do like a mock interview. It really tells you what you need to improve on, what skills you already have, what went well, and I think that's a very a nice way to do this. But you know, there's other things we could implement. Maybe it would be better if this was a voice chat. This is just like, I mean, if you're texting, maybe that feels a little bit different. But right, we've talked about things like whisper flow or super whisper, which are great ways for us to do like voice to text. So that would be a way to simulate it. And here we go. We've got our interview analysis. And so look, you see the interviewer asked for 3 things: teaching roles, industry experience, topics you can teach. I answer only lightly and didn't address industry experience at all. So it's like, can raise doubts, which typically emphasize application, relevance, and specificity. So it doesn't specify these things. Tone and presence, answers are very terse and undersell you. It gives me some feedback, stronger structure for the questions, and then it like upgrades my answers. So AgentOps is relevant, reframe it, concrete upgrades you can make now. So really, this is like a huge amount of information, which would be super helpful for me if I wanted to prep further. So let's actually see quickly like what this looks like in NAN. So the way I have it set up is when we submit that first form where we submit information about the interview, it creates a session ID based on that information. So if we click in, and I just made it in like a very simple way that I'm taking like the email of the user and I'm like doing something with the current time, just so it keeps all of the instances separate. Like, you know, you could come up with many different ways of doing this. This was just a certain way for me to do it. And remember, I had a place where people could submit their resume. So then I've got an if node, like do they have a resume? And if so, we use this thing called extract from file, which allows us to get information from a file. Otherwise, I don't. And it's fed into an AI agent. If we click into it, it says you are an interviewer, you work at the company given by the job title, and you're interviewing the user for the role, also that is given. Ask questions to determine their fit for the role and understand their experience. Just like an interviewer, you're only going to ask one question at a time, concentrate on focused questions. Your role is to be a good example of what an interview might look like. And then I give it a little bit more information about like some of its tools. And then I also say something that is very relevant to some of the newer versions of OpenAI and ChatGPT, or like GPT-5 and 5.1 and 5.2. It said, unless specifically asked for clarification when asking questions, do not give examples to the interviewee. They should think through the question on their own. So this is actually a big problem where it'll say like, do you mean this? For example, and then it'll give you a couple examples. And so that's something I really don't like. It's not good for an interview. So I really wanted to head that off, but that'll be very model dependent. And then if we look at the user message, I just give it a lot of the information, such as the resume, job description, job title, company name, and the interviewee name, just to give it a little bit more of a personal flair and also let it know exactly what's going on. SERP API is essentially a Google search. So I mentioned earlier that in the OpenAI chat model, we could, with some of the newer models, choose this thing called web search. So this is because I made this node earlier, it doesn't have that. But SERP API is a different way to do that. And so we could have it search for the company and get a little bit more information that way as well. Then I say send initial question. So that's asking the first question about that we see displayed, the first question in the interview. And then I'm actually storing all of the conversation in a Google Sheet. There's a lot of different ways to do this, but I'm storing each question and each answer separately, just so we have a record of the conversation. So when we want to analyze it at the end, we have a sense. And then, so remember, that's like one workflow. We send the initial form and we receive the first question. Then we have this like back and forth where, it asks a question, then we respond to the question, it asks another question, and we keep going. And so that's exactly what is going on in this one. So once they respond to the first question goes here, we want to add that response to the Google Sheet. This is very similar to the first AI agent. It's asking another question. We give it the information relevant about the role. And the reason we created this session ID is so it remembers our conversation. We've got this simple memory. Then it sends another question. It puts that question in a Google Sheet, and essentially we'll iterate here. They'll keep, it'll keep asking questions, they'll keep answering, and it'll keep triggering that small workflow. So there's a lot going on here. And even just this first part by itself is very, very powerful. But at the end, I wanted to add this analysis. So this is just for testing here, but when you click end interview, it triggers this webhook, and we actually get all the rows in the sheet that are relevant to that session. And then this is called a code node. Many of you have seen it if you've used ChatGPT or anything. It really likes to recommend this because it's very general. And all it's doing is it takes all of the rows and it condenses it into one key that we can then give to our analysis agent. And if I click into it, so we've got company, job title, job description, and the conversation. So that's the entire conversation. I say you're an expert at interview prep. You're provided with a conversation between an interviewer and an interviewee. Your role is to provide expert level feedback based on all of these things to help the user prepare. In formulating a response, give critical feedback that can be used to help the user improve. Consider their tone, how they present themselves, and any other factors in their response. So look, this is actually a very small system prompt, and we saw how much feedback it gave in a very structured format. We could make this even more structured if we want, but I thought that this was a great response by it. And finally, we respond to the webhook. Just as a quick note, so you see I've got these nice sticky notes that were mentioned in class. If I right click, I can actually add sticky note, and then I lost it. Okay, it's all the way over here. And if I double click in it, we can actually see it's in Markdown format, but that's kind of how I added it, just to be able to organize my thoughts on what exactly is happening. This is all available to you on the Recitation website, but just wanted to show you an example of what exactly is going on, how you can use this for a more complicated thing, and yeah. So with that in mind, I'm going to conclude this recitation. I really think that it's a great idea to start to play around with this. Don't worry too much if you're having trouble connecting up Lovable to N8N. This is how you would do it. I'm happy to help get you set up with it. But also even just making something in Lovable to get a sense of like what you want it to look like mocked up, even if it's not fully connected, can be a really great way to get started with your project and understand what exactly you might want. So with that in mind, I'm going to conclude this. Thanks for watching and see you next week.